Let's talk about stress, cortisol, memory loss, and what you can do about it. Let's dive in. A big concern that many of my clients have is because they're chronically stressed, they cannot remember things like they used to. So they can't perform at work, they're having difficulty with their memory, they're having difficulty with recall, and they're usually having difficulty concentrating. They can't do their presentation at work or go through their PowerPoint without forgetting words, and they end up spending a lot of time trying to recall things, which slows down their work function. Not to mention that they're also trying to juggle life and family and personal responsibilities, and they feel like they're literally losing their mind. So a lot of what I do is actually reassure them, no, you're not going crazy. It may feel like you are, but actually your body is responding to the stress in exactly the way it was designed. So what we need to do is better manage your stress so that you can actually think. So first, let's break down what actually happens when you have chronically high elevated levels of cortisol and how that can actually affect your working memory and also lead you to feel things like anxiety or even depression. So when we are stressed, what usually happens is our HPA axis gets activated, cortisol gets released, and it has various effects on the body. But what's supposed to happen is that we come back to homeostasis or come back to balance, and our body and our mind can go back to normal function. However, when we're chronically stressed, we generally have chronically elevated levels of cortisol, and that's where the problem starts to occur. In order to understand what cortisol is actually doing and how it has this effect and why it has this effect, we need to understand just a few areas of our brain. So let's talk about our limbic brain. Our limbic brain is responsible for learning and consolidation of memories. And specifically, there are two really important areas, and that's the hippocampus and the amygdala. The amygdala is kind of this connection between our memories and our safety response. It's often even called our fear center. So it's responsible for connecting memories with keeping us safe or moments of danger. And the point of that is that we evolved to not do things like put our hand on the stove. It keeps us safe and it protects us, and it's what's supposed to happen. And then we have our hippocampus, and this is where we actually are learning and consolidating memories. This is where the area that we have our working memory as well, where we're able to recall things. So when cortisol is chronically elevated, it actually makes more connections in the amygdala. This area of the brain can actually grow or increase in size or the number of neurons that it has. So what that actually does is actually make us more responsive to fear and actually starts to create anxiety as well. So think about this. When we're chronically stressed, we're releasing this excess cortisol. We're literally training our brain and body to become more anxious and become more fearful. And what's more, at the same time, what we have happening in the hippocampus, remember the area that's responsible for our learning and our consolidation of memory, that area is actually shrinking. High levels of cortisol inhibits our ability to retrieve those memories or inhibits the way our working memory actually functions. So in that case, we become literally unable to learn new things or literally unable to recall past events or experience or facts. So if you think about physiologically what's actually happening when you are chronically stressed, of course you can't think. Of course you have brain fog. So now the question is, what the heck are we supposed to do about it? Telling somebody to relax and to just calm down is rarely ever helpful. But what we have to do is actually stop pumping out so much cortisol. So we've got to turn down this cocktail that's creating more fear. And one of the ways in which we can do this is to start to activate our parasympathetic nervous system. So getting out of that sympathetic mode where we're dumping adrenaline and cortisol and instead shift ourselves into the relax and rest and digest type of nervous system function. And I have a couple of favorite ways. There are many ways to do that, but some of the ones that I have seen to be most effective and very helpful, not only for myself, but with my clients are the following. Number one is working with your mindset, working with mindfulness-based stress reduction techniques. So things like meditation, things like journaling and gratitude practice. Now, the reason why something like meditation is actually helpful is because when we are specifically practicing an opening type of focus in our meditation, we actually start to change our brainwave patterns. When we are stressed, we are generally in what we call a high beta brainwave pattern. But when we shift into this type of meditation, we actually start to descend into some of the lower states. So we can go into an alpha brainwave pattern. And this pattern is usually where the parasympathetic nervous system is activated. In this state, we can start to turn off those signals to the amygdala, right? The cortisol is coming down. Now we're no longer anxious. We're no longer fearful. And now we can start to improve our memory and our working memory and function. So it's not just with meditation that we're relaxing. We're literally changing our brainwave patterns and breaking out of that uncontrolled cycle where the high cortisol has now impacted areas like our amygdala and our hippocampus. Another form of mindfulness, and also kind of including a little bit of movement, is actually yoga, and specifically the type of yoga in which you are linking your breath to the movements. Because in this way, we're actually using the breath as another way to push us into the parasympathetic nervous system. When we breathe in a certain pattern, just like if we're doing breathing exercises, what we actually do is activate the vagus nerve. Now, the vagus nerve has also been known as the brake on the sympathetic nervous system. So when we are increasing our vagal tone or are activating that vagus nerve, what we can actually do is shift our body and shift our mind into that parasympathetic nervous state. This is specifically with those types of yoga that actually connect your breath and the movement together at a controlled pace. So it's not your power core or your whatever type of crazy yoga with blasting loud music. No, this is where you're actually focusing on your breath. Another great method that I use is actually exercise. And it doesn't have to be anything crazy. It can be something as simple as walking. And the reason why, especially if we're walking outdoors, what happens when we start to walk, we actually start to tamp down our prefrontal cortex. That's the area of the brain that's responsible for all the thinking about all the stressors and things you have to do. It's constantly trying to think about ways to help you problem solve and creating worry in many cases. So if we could tamp down this area of the brain, again, it allows us to maybe push a little bit more into the parasympathetic nervous system. Not to mention, when we're out walking or when we're exercising, we're also releasing some feel-good endorphins and, again, tamping down that sympathetic nervous system. So doing something as simple as adding in a 20-minute walk 2 or 3 times a week can be game changing when it comes to how you are dealing with stress and how resilient you become in working with your stress. And another method that I actually like to use is actually heart rate variability training or some type of biofeedback. I have a couple of videos all about HRV and HRV training and how I do it. I will leave a link to that video somewhere around here. The goal of this is actually being able to see what your heart rate is doing when you are stressed versus when you are in a relaxed state. So what you generally have is some sort of device, and it's connected generally to your heart rate. So you have a heart rate monitor, and then what you're able to see is how your breath or how your relaxation or bringing up thoughts of love and kindness or gratitude, how they actually start to affect your heart rate variability. And so we want our heart rate variability to be high, and that is because it's actually we're kind of using heart rate variability as a measurement of our nervous system. And the higher the variability, that means that we are more resilient to stress. So practicing your breath work or practicing bringing up feelings of love and joy and kindness while watching what happens on the screen helps to, again, retrain your brain out of that sympathetic nervous system pathway. So these are just a few of the techniques that I like to use that have been very successful in working with my clients. If you have questions about how to work with me or would like to work with me or learn more, you can click down on the link in the description box. You can work with me through my coaching program, or you can do a virtual consult with me. So I hope that this video was helpful and that you've learned something, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.